There's a very specific version of space history that we all grew up with, especially if you grew up in the West.
Mm.
It's linear, it's triumphant, and it almost always ends with a flag planted in the dust of the moon.
Neil Armstrong.
Neil Armstrong. We're conditioned to think of him as the main character of the space age. But when you actually dig into the archives, when you strip away the Cold War headlines, you realize that Armstrong was walking on a stage that was, well, built by someone else entirely.
That's absolutely true. And I think it's fair to say that while Armstrong took the giant leap, Yuri Gagarin was the one who proved that humans could even survive the jump in the first place.
Exactly. But here's the thing, and this is why we're doing this deep dive today. We usually stop the story at the landing. We celebrate the 108 minutes Gagarin spent in orbit, the triumph, the parade, the smile.
Right.
But the sources we're looking at today paint a picture of a man who was arguably safest when he was strapped to a nuclear missile, and in the most danger once he was back on solid ground.
It brings us to this concept of the golden cage. That's really the core theme here. We're looking at how the Soviet machine transformed a flesh and blood pilot into a living monument.
And what's the problem with being a monument?
Well, you aren't allowed to have flaws, you aren't allowed to make mistakes, and you certainly aren't allowed to risk your life flying dangerous jets anymore.
Which creates this tragic paradox. The very thing that made him a global icon, his bravery, his need to push the envelope, was the specific trait the state then tried to crush to protect him.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a heavy stack of sources today. Declassified reports on the Vostok program, some really heartbreaking biographical details about his mental health, and transcripts of his communications that, when you compare them, tell a completely different story than the newsreels. So let's unpack the man behind the smile.
To understand the tragedy, you really have to start with the selection. Why him? Why Yuri Gagarin?
Because in 1961, the Soviet Union had plenty of pilots.
Plenty. Guys with more flight hours, guys with higher military rank. But the selection process wasn't just about skill. It was. It was a geometry problem.
This was one of the first things that jumped out at me in the notes. We tend to think of astronauts as these larger-than-life figures, almost like superheroes.
Right.
But for Vostok 1, being larger-than-life would have literally disqualified you.
Yeah.
You had to visualize the machine. The Vostok 1 capsule wasn't a ship like the shuttle or even the Soyuz.
No, not at all. It was a sphere. A metal ball with a diameter of only 2.3 meters.
That's about 7.5 feet.
It's incredibly tight. And remember, that is an empty space. You have to pack life support, radios, heat shielding, and a massive ejection seat into that ball. There was physically no room for a large human being.
So Sergei Korolev, the famous chief designer of the Soviet space program, he needed a pilot who was compact.
He needed a space jockey. Literally. And Gagarin was 5'2", or about 1.57 meters. He was the aerodynamic ideal. Every kilogram of pilot weight meant more fuel, and in 1961, the rockets were barely powerful enough as it was.
So a taller, heavier pilot might have grounded the mission before it even launched.
It's very possible. So his height was a technical asset. But the sources emphasized that Korolev wasn't just looking for a body to fill a seat.
No, he was looking for a face to sell a system.
This is the peasant narrative, which was crucial for the propaganda of the time. The Soviets didn't want a general's son or an intellectual from Moscow to be the first.
They wanted a true son of the soil.
Exactly. Gagarin's father was a carpenter, his mother was a milkmaid, he grew up in a mud hut during the Nazi occupation. He was the total package for a socialist hero proof that under communism, a boy from nowhere could touch the stars.
And then, of course, there was the smile. The Gagarin smile.
It wasn't just a facial expression.
No, it became a diplomatic weapon later on.
It was genuine, disarming, infectious. But there's a specific moment during the selection process that I think sealed the deal for Korolev, even more than the smile. It wasn't a test score, it was a tiny gesture of respect.
Oh, I know what you're referring to, the shoes off moment.
Yeah.
I love this detail because it feels so human.
It does. So Korolev brings this group of elite candidates, the Vanguard 6, to see the Vostok prototype for the first time.
This gleaming piece of high-tech machinery.
Right. He invites them to sit inside, and when it's Gagarin's turn, before he climbs up the ladder, he stops, and he takes off his shoes.
It's like entering a home in Russia or a temple in Japan. You leave the dirt outside.
Precisely. It showed a deep, intuitive respect. He wasn't treating the spacecraft like a piece of military hardware. He was treating it like something sacred, and Korolev saw that. He realized this small man had a soul big enough for the moment.
So fast forward to the morning of April 12, 1961. This carpenter's son is sitting on top of a modified R-7 ICBM. And let's be clear for you listening, this is a nuclear delivery system with a chair bolted on top.
It was a bomb, essentially. A bomb designed to throw a warhead to America, now repurposed to throw a man into history.
But here's the part that always gets me, and it really contradicts the hero pilot narrative. We talk about him as the great explorer, but he wasn't actually flying the ship, was he?
No, not really. And this speaks to the sheer terror of the unknown at the time. You have to remember, nobody knew what would happen to the human mind in space.
Right.
The doctors and psychiatrists were genuinely afraid that zero gravity would cause a psychotic break. They thought a human brain might just snap without gravity, leading the pilot to hallucinate, panic, and crash the ship.
So the logic was, the pilot might go crazy, so let's treat him like cargo.
Basically, yeah. They locked the controls, the entire mission was automated. Gagarin was essentially a passenger in his own history-making moment.
But he did have a lifeline.
He did.
Yeah.
There was a sealed envelope with a secret code 125 that would unlock the controls, but his orders were to open it only in an absolute emergency.
It's terrifying. You're strapped to a rocket, shot into the void, and you can't even touch the steering wheel unless you're about to die.
And speaking of dying, that almost happened pretty abruptly on the way down.
We always see the smooth CGI recreations of the flight in documentaries, but the return trip was a complete disaster.
Disaster is almost an understatement. It was a near-death experience. The Vostok craft had two parts: the descent module, where Gagarin was, and the service module with the engine.
They were supposed to separate cleanly before hitting the atmosphere.
They didn't. The sources describe this terrifying image of the craft tumbling wildly because the two parts were still tethered together by a bundle of wires that failed to cut.
Imagine spinning like a top while plunging into a furnace. He's experiencing 10 times the force of gravity crushing his chest.
His vision is graying out, the temperature outside is rising to 3,000 degrees, and because of the extra weight of the attached module, the aerodynamics are all wrong. He's just spinning uncontrollably.
And he can't do anything. He's just waiting for the wires to burn through.
Which they eventually did. They snapped just in time for the heat shield to orient itself. If that had taken 10 seconds longer, we wouldn't be talking about Yuri Gagarin, the hero. We'd be talking about a tragedy.
But he survives the vacuum, he survives the tumble, and then comes the landing. And this is a detail the Soviets lied about for years. We see the American capsule splashing down with the astronauts inside. Gagarin didn't land in his ship.
No, he bailed out. This was a state secret for a long time. At 23,000 feet, the hatch blew and he ejected. He parachuted to the ground separately from the capsule.
Why hide that? I mean, it seems even more badass to jump out of his spaceship.
It was about the record books. The FAI, the international body that tracks aviation records, had a rule that to claim an altitude record, the pilot had to land with the vehicle.
Ah. So if the Soviets admitted he jumped out, the flight wouldn't technically count as the first complete space flight by those specific standards.
They omitted it.
So he lands in a potato field. A grandmother and her granddaughter are the first people to see him. He's in this bright orange suit, helmet on. They think he's a monster or a spy.
And he yells, "Don't be afraid, I am a Soviet like you. I'd have descended from space and I need to find a telephone."
That moment, finding the telephone to call Moscow, that is the exact moment the golden cage slams shut.
This is the shift. This is where the story turns from an adventure into a tragedy.
As soon as he made that call, Yuri Gagarin ceased to be a private citizen.
Yeah.
He became the avatar of socialism.
Yes. The Soviet leadership, specifically Nikita Khrushchev, looked at him and realized he was too precious to risk. He was the face of the future. So they made a decision that would slowly destroy him.
They grounded him.
They grounded him. It's such a cruel irony. The one thing he's famous for is the one thing he's never allowed to do again.
It was a slow death for a man with his energy. He went from training for the unknown to what he called being a circus performer.
His life became a blur of world tours. Egypt, England, Japan, Cuba. Endless banquets, endless handshakes, giving the same scripted speech 1,000 times.
And looking at the biographical notes, you can see the psychological toll. It wasn't just boredom, it was intense surveillance.
He couldn't go to the bathroom without the KGB noting it. And then there was the drinking.
The toasting culture was mandatory, wasn't it?
It was. You have to understand, everywhere he went, people wanted to have a drink with the first man in space. To refuse was seen as an insult to the host, whether it was a factory worker or a prime minister. Alcohol became a coping mechanism.
And he was under immense pressure to be this new Soviet man. Flawless, happy, perfect.
But inside, he was rotting. He felt like a fraud because he wasn't flying.
There's that incident in Foros, in the Crimea, just a few months after the flight. This really cracks the mask for me.
The Foros incident. It's a sad, messy moment. He was at a sanatorium, supposedly resting. There was alcohol, there was a woman who wasn't his wife, and when his wife knocked on the door, he panicked.
And he jumped off a second-story balcony to escape the confrontation.
He did. And he didn't stick the landing.
No.
He hit a curb, cracked his skull, and ended up with a permanent scar above his left eyebrow. If you look at photos of Gagarin after 1961, you can see it.
They tried to airbrush it out for the official portraits, but in the candid shots, it's there.
A physical crack in the perfect hero.
But the deepest crack wasn't physical. It was emotional. And this brings us to the Soyuz 1 tragedy. I feel like you can't understand Gagarin's end without understanding Vladimir Komarov.
Komarov is the ghost that haunted Gagarin. They were best friends, fellow cosmonauts. In 1967, the Soviet Union wanted to launch a new ship, the Soyuz.
A rush job for the 50th anniversary of the Communist Revolution.
Right, and everyone in the program knew the ship wasn't ready. It was riddled with hundreds of technical flaws.
Komarov was the prime pilot. Gagarin was the backup.
Correct, and there's a persistent story backed by several sources and memoirs that Gagarin tried to use his status to save his friend. He tried to get himself put on the main crew.
Wait, he wanted to fly the death trap.
He knew the ship was doomed. His logic was, I am the national hero. I'm the golden boy. If I'm the pilot, the Politburo will not dare launch a faulty ship. They will cancel the launch to save me.
He tried to use his golden cage as a shield to save Komarov.
But it didn't work.
The leadership wouldn't switch them.
No. They launched Komarov, and as predicted, the ship failed catastrophically. The solar panels didn't open, the power failed, and eventually the parachutes tangled on re-entry. Komarov slammed into the Earth at full speed.
And Gagarin.
Gagarin had to go to the crash site. He had to identify what was left of his best friend. The report describes it as a charred lump.
Horrible.
He was devastated. He was reportedly enraged, blaming the leadership for essentially murdering his friend for a propaganda deadline. There were rumors he even wanted to throw a drink in Brezhnev's face.
That rage seems to have been a turning point, though. It snapped him out of the depression.
Yes. He stopped being the circus performer and started fighting to get back into the cockpit. He felt he owed it to Komarov. He couldn't be a monument anymore. He had to be a pilot.
And he fought the bureaucracy for permission to retrain on fighter jets. He wanted to prove he was still competent, that he wasn't just a relic of 1961.
And this leads us to the comparison that I think really defines his journey. We have two transcripts here, one from the beginning, 1961, and one from the very end, 1968. The difference between them is, well, it's everything.
It's the arc of his life in two snippets of audio.
Let's look at 1961, Vostok 1. He's 27. He breaks military protocol at launch by yelling, "Poyakali, let's go!" instead of the formal confirmation.
And once he's up there, I have a quote here. He says, "I see Earth. It is so beautiful. I see the clouds. It's magnificent. What beauty."
It's ecstatic. It's the voice of a child. His heart rate was 150, but it was pure joy. He was a poet in that moment, a guest in the cosmos, looking down at the world with the eyes of a god.
Right. Filled with wonder.
Now compare that to March 27, 1968. He's finally won his battle. He's back in a jet, a MiG-15, on a training flight.
The tone is completely different.
It's clinical, disciplined. 625th, task in the zone finished. Requesting permission to turn to a heading of 320 degrees.
And his very last recorded word,
Panal.
Panyal, it means understood or Roger. No poetry, no magnificent beauty, just work.
But don't you see that is the poetry? In 1961, he was a passenger, a mascot for a new era. In 1968, he was a professional reclaiming his agency. He wasn't looking down at the globe anymore. He was staring at the instruments at the horizon.
He was doing the work he loved. He wasn't a god anymore. He was a man at work.
And minutes after saying Kanyal, the plane crashed.
It spiraled into the woods near the town of Kursak. No distress call, no ejection, just silence.
It's a tragic end, obviously. He was only 34. But looking at the sources, there's this concept of poetic closure.
It's a hard thing to say about a young man's death, but do you think there was a sort of mercy in this?
It's a difficult interpretation, but yes. There is a sense of narrative mercy. If Gagarin had lived, what was waiting for him?
More dinners, more toasts, getting older.
Exactly. Or worse, irrelevance. Watching newer technology make his feet look small, watching the Americans land on the moon the following year, which would have crushed him, watching himself grow old, paunchy, and grounded forever.